college football. I'm your host, Grayson Grunhafer, and there was a big hire in the college football world today as Purdue hired Ryan Walters, the defense coordinator out of Illinois. Very interesting hire, and a guy that had been brought up a few times. I'd seen multiple reports talking about how he was a candidate. He interviewed for the Colorado job. Of course, that job went to Deion Sanders. And I think there were a lot of interested programs looking at him as a potential guy who could be a head coach in the near future. He becomes the fourth youngest active head coach. So it's just interesting. Purdue went with a young guy. Purdue went with a defensive guy, which is kind of against what they've done in recent hires. I know Darrell Hazel, when they hired him from Kent State, he had some pretty productive offenses, but he tried to make it a more defense and run game focused team. That did not quite work, obviously. And then Jeff Brom comes in, and you're seeing them go for this shift, right? They brought in a guy from Western Kentucky who was putting up 40-something points a game. They brought him in, and he kind of got them back to this quote-unquote heavy offensive game, even though the numbers, which I'll get to in a minute, don't necessarily reflect them being this high-powered offense that Brom kind of, I think most people initially thought Brom would get them to. As far as Walters goes, though, I mean, this 2022 year was special for him. I mean, what he did with that Illinois defense, they were the number one scoring defense in the country, number 2 in yards per play. They were just very sound and very good, and you got to see them in these moments that were, I would say, very impactful. You know, the game against Michigan, for one, where they really went toe-to-toe with them, and it was all because of their defense. Very impressive. He also played against Purdue this year. Obviously, Purdue beat Illinois, but I think when you get to see a defense and when you get to see a defense coordinator each year, kind of makes you wonder, okay, this is what he does pretty well. This guy looks like he's pretty good. He's making things tough for our offense. I think that's helpful as well. And I know Purdue beat him this year, but Illinois beat him the year before, just throwing that out there. I will say, though, I think it's interesting because of the philosophy change, though. And it makes you wonder, okay, so when UCLA and USC come into the Big Ten, what's that going to look like? Well, obviously, the divisions are going to shake up a little bit. Purdue's currently in the more favorable division, being in the Big Ten West. That's going to change. When UCLA and USC arrive, there'll probably be a massive shakeup to some extent. And so it seems like Purdue's kind of thinking, okay, maybe we need to focus more on the defensive side and maybe turn into a more Big Ten-like team. When you look around the conference like Wisconsin and Iowa and Minnesota, these run-heavy teams that play really good defense, or maybe, just maybe, Walters isn't going to come in with that mindset. Maybe he's going to come in with a different mindset than what they did at Illinois. Maybe he does believe in more of a high-powered offense. I don't think we'll know that until we see who his offense coordinator hire is, but based on his track record, you would think that they're going to try to rely on their defense and their run game. That's at least what I would think. That's my initial impressions of this hire. Now, I kind of want to look through Purdue a little bit. During this time with Jeff Brom, defensively, they were 24th in Jeff Brom's first year, scoring defense-wise. So really good, but those weren't Brom's guys. You know, he brought in a couple, but those weren't his guys. Then they were 83rd, 86th, 67th, 34th, 54th. So pretty good. Like, as they made that run towards Brom's best couple years there, they got really a lot better defensively. And when Brom was successful at Purdue, they did have a very good defense. They had pretty much a top 50 defense in his 3 best years, which I find rather interesting as well. But the thing that I think is the most kind of notable in my eyes of what Jeff Brom did was the fact that their best year offensively, they were 52nd. 52nd in the country. He never once had a top 50 scoring defense or offense in his time at Purdue. And so I think there's this misconception that Purdue was so good offensively, they're putting up these big numbers, and their defense was what was letting them down. Now, there were a couple years where the defense did let them down, but the offense wasn't exactly making up for it during those years either. Most years they were in the 70s. They had a year in the 90s. I mean, they just weren't great offensively. And a part of that is the Big Ten style. I understand that. But in general, this team was just kind of balanced, kind of mediocre on both sides of the ball. And honestly, better defensively than they were offensively. And so I think that could probably play a role in this as far as going, hey, we think Ryan Walters can make this Purdue defense consistently a top 35 defense in the entire country with a ceiling of maybe being a top 10 type defense. And then offensively, we actually don't think that we are going to be that bad, or at least we're not going to be worse than we were with Brom at Purdue. Pretty crazy to think about. Pretty crazy to think about in my eyes, and that's why I think maybe Purdue went this way. Now, I expected them to go offense. I really did. I thought they were going to look at offensive coordinators like maybe a Garrett Riley or a Zach Kittley or a Todd Monken at Georgia. I thought that would be an interesting route. I thought if they were going to go defense, they were probably going to try to get someone like Jim Leonard, the defense coordinator at Wisconsin. Obviously, they did go defense, but went with Walters instead. Another name that was kind of on the list late was Tyson Helton, the Western Kentucky head coach. Obviously, another offensive guru and a Jeff Brom disciple, was his OC for 2014-2015. So a lot of offensive names were mentioned in this, but it ends up being Ryan Walters. Very fascinating hire. I actually think this is going to end up being a pretty good one for Purdue. I think they're adjusting to the times in the Big Ten and kind of where the Big Ten's heading, with a lot of teams that have a lot of high-powered offenses. And I think Purdue's deciding, hey, if we want to be really competitive in the Big Ten for years to come, we need to find someone that's elite on one side of the ball. And they felt like Ryan Walters was the most elite, at least on the defensive side of the ball. So I think it's going to be fascinating. You're going to see a little bit of a shift there at Purdue. And now I'm curious what Walters is going to do as far as building an offensive staff, building something to complement what he's going to bring in defensively to this Purdue program. And I think it's going to be a really good one. I'm excited for Purdue. I think they made a very nice hire here, and I think he's a guy who could do very similar things to Brom and maybe, just maybe, be even better sooner at Purdue. So good job. Good job, Purdue. Good hire. Later on this week, we're going to preview a couple bowl matchups, and then I'll have my bowl picks for week 1 at the very end of the week. But thanks for listening today to Crystal Ball College Football.